Welcome to the Second Amendment and its slow demise. I'm a proud American, but I came here originally at the age of 55 from the UK back in 2000, which was to marry and settle down. Let me begin with a brief background, and you'll have to excuse the accent, I'm just a little old to lose it. I was always interested in guns, but back in the early 80s and beyond became an avid collector of firearms, as well as a competitive and responsible shooter, mostly with handguns. I relied, however, on using my mere privilege as a humble subject to own firearms at all. Each gun had to be registered, and it was also required to have a mandatory entry of every ammunition purchase onto a license. Despite some ever-present ripples of anti-gun sentiment, until 1987 all was reasonably well. Things, however, began to change after August 19, 1987, when Michael Ryan in Hungerford, Berkshire County, went on a killing spree with an AK-47. It was not too long after that there was a ban placed on semi-auto rifles and carbines. This then meant I had two guns no longer legal, which had to be deactivated. Take note, one gun owner sinned, the rest were punished, and I finished up with two wall hangers. This was maybe a wake-up call looking back on it, because when in March 13, 1996, a total weirdo called Thomas Hamilton went on a crazed shooting spree at a school in Dunblane, Scotland. This, unfortunately, with registered and technically legal handguns. Come September 1997, the time came when a handgun ban came into force. That was it. So I had to turn in a collection of many handguns, both old and new. The government had been given just the excuse they needed to appease the anti-gun brigade and go for more votes. I did over time receive some financial compensation, but hey, that was hardly what I wanted. This certainly proved, if anyone might doubt it, that registration works when it comes to confiscations. Take note. When I moved to America, all I had left was just 4 long arms to import. 2 shotguns, .22 rifle, and an old muzzle loader. Over time, once I became a legal permanent resident and prior to gaining citizenship, I began to rebuild my collection and get back into shooting once again. The emphasis was once more on my handgun enjoyment. One thing I always saw as a severe lack in the UK was having any actual right like the Second Amendment, instead of a feeble and humble privilege. And for sure there was no chance whatsoever to legally carry concealed for protection. Once settled down, however, it was my intention to not only do all I could to support the Second Amendment, but also to fully utilize my legal right to carry a concealed weapon. I started concealed carry in early 2002 when I got my permit, as I see it, quite simply taking responsibility for the protection of myself and my family. Now we come to the main purpose of this discussion, which is to explore the current fragility of the Second Amendment, if not the entire Bill of Rights, and try and work out or see through the many obstacles increasingly placed in the way. We can identify 3 factors in particular, whereby the antis present us with emotion while we try and answer with logic, which it seems is usually ignored or trashed by totally ineffectual arguments. Then, too, add the control factor, the wish by liberal-thinking people in particular that no one should be armed, let alone have the ability to take up their innate right of self-defense. They should all accept the Second Amendment as what it is, a right to keep and bear arms. Let's address some of the many issues, albeit of course from a gun owner's perspective. Fact: America is, through its mere heritage even, awash with guns, which would be no surprise to anyone at all. It's the nature of the beast and goes with the territory. So, disarm law-abiding folks and what is left? A still massive source of firearms readily available and in circulation underground for all the bad guys. How do we disarm them? In my opinion, it is not and never will be possible, being quite realistic about it. So, what would be the end result of a ban? It would quite simply either make criminals out of previously law-abiding people who keep their guns regardless, or make the huge majority of law-abiding citizens impotent for any means of adequate self-defense, despite criminals still having a means to attack, injure and kill with their guns. There are so many common and often used expressions by anti-gun people. "There'll be blood in the streets," is one, when they are faced with a state passing a new carry law. Then maybe, "Why does anyone need a gun?" And that, of course, flies totally in the face of the Second Amendment and forgets about any need for folks to defend themselves against the armed criminal. Oh, and another good one. "No one should be allowed to own one of those," when commenting on military-style semi-auto rifles and semi-handguns. For those who expect mayhem through gun ownership, they might well remember something which I think is often forgotten these days, which is just how convoluted and even sinister the legal aspect can be when it comes to self-defense shootings. To such an extent that it could be said there is even a disincentive for someone armed to even try and defend themselves at all, with the prospect of all that might ensue, which includes not just ramifications from law enforcement, but lawsuits from families of aggressors, whether killed or injured in the fight. Castle doctrine and stand-your-ground laws have been introduced in a few states, but not enough at all. I contend that if a defensive shooting was proven to be justified, then the perpetrator, whether dead or injured, rescinds any right, along with his or her family, to file suit for damages. They chose their direction and path, not the victim. The bottom line, though, carrying a weapon is no excuse to start a gunfight, which most people realise, and actually, if sensible, they do all possible to avoid trouble. It is purely a measure of last resort, simply to be able to possibly live another day if put under lethal threat. An unfortunate fact of life is there will always be people comprising a small minority who have a propensity towards stupid, maybe even developing social problems, coupled with inadequate responsibility, such that yes, they could start shooting. They could be careless and leave a gun where a child could get hold of it. They might even use the gun convenience for a suicide. But let's again gain perspective. Out of the millions of law-abiding and responsible gun owners, the statistics for the much-touted accidents, suicides, etc. are very, very small. Again, why apply punitive measures to 99% plus of good people, and so try and deprive them of their rights under the Second Amendment, as well as their right to self-defense? Shall issue is something that's now in force in many states, 37 I think now, with 9 others as may issue. Read that, however, as probably won't. And to a degree at least, we have reciprocity, which has enabled many people to carry legally outside of their own state as well. We do, however, and sadly, have some absurd restrictions which in some carry states really verge on the ridiculous. We see gun-free zones to greater or lesser degrees, places, establishments, workplaces, etc., where firearms are disallowed or even banned, and so only those with criminal intent can remain armed. And why should they obey any laws after all?